Yield 5 minutes to Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. History walks with us as we begin our work today. Fortunately, it offers some guidance as well. History offers not a single example of a nation that has ever spent and borrowed and taxed its way to prosperity, but it offers us many, many examples of nations that have spent and borrowed and taxed their way to economic ruin and bankruptcy. And history is screaming this warning at us that the nations that bankrupt themselves aren't around very long, because before you can provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare, you have to be able to pay for it, and the ability of our nation to do so is now in grave danger. Throughout these hearings, economists from every part of the political spectrum have warned us that we have at best just a few precious years left to avoid a sovereign debt crisis and potentially the financial collapse of the United States government. Fortunately, history also offers us lessons of what to do and what not to do. We know what not to do. Herbert Hoover responded to the session of 1929 by increasing federal spending by a staggering 60% in just 4 years. He began by imposing the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which was a steep tax on some 20,000 imported products. He ended by boosting the federal income tax from 23 to 65%. Franklin Roosevelt simply amplified and expanded these policies, and in 1939 the unemployment rate was just as high as when he started. We had lost an entire decade. In 1945, Harry Truman abolished the excess profits tax. He slashed federal income taxes. In 1946, Truman cut the federal budget from $85 billion down to $30 billion in a single year. He fired 10 million federal employees. It was called war demobilization. The Keynesians at the time predicted 25% unemployment and a renewed depression. Instead, these policies produced the entire post-war economic boom. We have more recent examples, and I reach out to my friends on the other side of the aisle to join them in their praise of Bill Clinton, but we have to look at the policies that produced the prosperity. During his administration, Bill Clinton reduced federal spending by a miraculous 3% of GDP. He dared to touch the third rail of entitlement spending, and he produced the most important and fundamental reform of the welfare state in our century. He signed what amounted to the biggest capital gains tax cut in history on home appreciation. He delivered the only 4 budget surpluses in the last 40 years and a period of pronounced economic prosperity. And by contrast, George W. Bush is worthy of criticism. But again, we have to look at the policies to be critical of. He recklessly increased federal spending. He boosted federal spending 2.5% of GDP. He reintroduced the discredited folly of stimulus spending. He approved the biggest expansion of entitlement spending since the Great Society. He produced massive budget deficits. If entitlement spending and stimulus programs and crushing deficits and massive spending increases were the road to prosperity, I submit to you that the Bush administration should have produced a new golden age for the economy. So let's put partisanship aside today and concentrate on policy. In the mid-1990s, a Republican Congress and a Democratic president, following precisely the approach outlined in this measure before us today, balanced the budget, reformed entitlement spending, placed us on a path to pay off the entire national debt, and produced a period of economic expansion and prosperity. This budget before us today turns us away from the policies that we know do not work toward policies that we know do work. It brings federal spending back under control. It puts Medicare and Medicaid on a sound financial foundation. It produces 1 million new private sector jobs next year through economic expansion. And it places our nation on a path so that when my children retire, the retirement systems they'll have paid into during their entire lives will be safe and secure, and their nation will be debt-free and prosperous. Yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to yield